my friends, you guys have absolutely no idea how excited I am to talk about red and purple Luffy today. How's it going, all of you beautiful people around the world? My name is Ryan. Say it with me, aka Blackbeard TCG. I hope you guys are all having an amazing day, and if not, hopefully I can make it a little bit better. Now, look, in today's video, I gotta go over my red and purple Monkey D. Luffy list. Guys, prior to this deck of 3 purple and red leaders coming out, you guys know that Queen is the most fun deck I've played in the One Piece trading card game. I've said that on many occasions. Now, with these decks being released, with OP05 right around the corner, Red Purple Luffy is the most fun I've had in the One Piece card game. Like, and don't get me wrong, I still love me some Queen. I still enjoy a ton of Queen. Do not get me wrong, please. But with that being said, Red Purple Luffy is another beast. And this is my list. I'm going to go through everything. I'm going to talk to you guys about the ratios, things I could change, things that I could see people play. I'm going to keep making new versions of this deck, especially as more of our friends over in Asia start to pick up Red Purple Luffy and hopefully bring it to events. Obviously, he's 3 life, but I think he's very strong. If we see more people bring him to events and see how they iterate on the deck, then of course I will be updating my versions to see what we can learn from them. Of course, right now in my build, I only have 1 copy of Radical Beam at the moment, just because if we do not get Radical Beam unrestricted in English by the time this set comes out, it's still a very, very strong card. You're still going to want to play at least 1 copy of it, or the 1 copy that you can play, rather, right? So that's why I have this here. By the time this set comes out, by the time this deck and set comes out, if the restricted list does get lifted, because as we know, they are going to be doing it, as it seems, on a set-to-set basis, if we can run 4 copies of Radical Beam, we will. And we'll talk about that as we go through the list. So, why do I find this deck so fun? Well, right off the bat, it's 6,000 power. So 6,000 power automatically puts him in the likes of things like Whitebeard in red, right? Edward Newgate, 6,000 power. But the thing is, Edward Newgate has 6 life. Obviously, he loses 1 life per turn, but he has 6 life. Now, with Luffy, he has 3 life. And so you'd be wondering, like, okay, like, he has 3 life. How is he going to survive the tests of the game, the trials and tribulations of a match with only 3 life? This is the lowest life that we have in the game thus far, I believe. And so it's actually quite easy because you play a ton of 2K counters. We're playing Sasaki here. We have Khalifa as well. In addition to that, we have 4 copies of X-Drake. So we have a ton of 2K counters. We play blockers in the deck as well. Tony Chopper as well as Higurashi. So we have a ton of defense in order for us to make sure that we do not get hit in the early game and allow us to use our leader ability, where once per turn, if your field has 0 or 8 Dawn, then you can add 1 Dawn from your Dawn deck and set it as active. That's the thing that's really good. You can set it as active, which opens up things like Radical Beam, which opens up things like Blast Breath, which we'll talk about. So it allows you to play both offensively and defensively with Monkey D. Luffy, and has immense synergy with everything else. So your early game is really focused on you trying to ramp and also trying to make sure you don't take hits, making sure that you have your blockers in Higurashi and Chopper out, and making sure that you use your 2K counters liberally. Just feel free to use them. Try not to take any hits if possible. You could take 1 hit if needed. Of course, if you do have that Radical Beam, of course you want that to be live. So sitting at 2 life isn't the end of the world, but of course with people running more things that have double attack, you know, we're seeing a lot more resurgence of 5 cost Smoker as well as Don Krieg, at least over here in the English meta in OPO3. Will that be the case later on? I don't think so, but there are those double hit attackers out there, so you do want to be kind of wary of that if you do get hit, but sitting at 2 life on this leader is not a bad idea. Now, outside of defense, in terms of blockers and your 2K counters, how do you ramp? Well, we run 4 copies of Basil Hawkins OPO1. I know you guys probably have not even seen this card ever. The stat line is absolutely atrocious, but you don't play it for the stat line. You play it strictly for its on-playability. You add 1 Dawn from your Dawn deck and rest it on play. Now, of course, there's other characters that have an ability similar to this, so why Basil Hawkins? Well, it has counter, it has 1000 counter, but also when it gets hit in trigger, it's so sweet because you can play him for free and you get that free Dawn. Remember, your goal with Luffy is to just scale to the mid to late game. Once you get to 8 Dawn, Now it's time to play. Well, really, once you get to 7 Dawn, and we'll talk to that. But once you get to the 7 to 8, sorry, the 7 to 10 Dawn range, now it's time to cook. Now it's time to eat, you feel me? And the faster that you get there, as well as the safer that you get there, the better. And so Basil Hawkins has counter, allows you to ramp. If it gets hit in life, for example, if you take that first hit, as I mentioned, and it hits a Basil Hawkins, all of these things allow you to ramp up a little bit faster. In addition to that, you have to play John Bart. Now, the thing is with him is on play, you could just set 1 Dawn as active right off the bat. Stat line is a little bit weak, 5,000 power for 4 costs. But the thing is, he can swing into basically every leader in the game other than Luffy himself as well as Edward Newgate. So it's not too bad on that front. But you're basically just playing him to ramp, right? It's nice to have a body on board to swing with. But again, he falls into the same category as Basil Hawkins. You want him to ramp. Now, ideally, I would want to get 2 more copies of this in the deck as well. I'm still trying to figure out the ratios. Maybe I would drop 2 copies of Lead Performer and potentially add John Bart, but then I feel like I want 4 copies of Lead Performer and 4 copies of John Bart. So part of me thinks maybe I would have to drop some of my defensive core. But again, this is just the first version. This is just the idea put together. We're still crafting it. But with that being said, you have to run at least some copies of this. And this also comes in the new starter deck. He's going to assist with your ramping. Now, of course, we have access to more blockers, right? We talked about Higurashi and Chopper in the early game for blockers. We have some mid-game blockers as well in Queen. 5 cost 6,000 power, has been a staple of purple decks since the pre-release, really, right? Queen, as we all know, is a very good card. You're able to draw, you're able to get a body on board that's 6k power, and also have the ability to use it as a blocker. Very, very versatile. You have to run that. Now, Trafalgar Law, at first glance, I wasn't really feeling it because this Trafalgar Law reminded me of the the blue Trafalgar Law, where if your opponent has 6 cards in their hand, then you can drop 1 of their life. Whereas for this Trafalgar Law, if they have 7 cards in their hand, you could trash 2 from their hand. So it almost works a lot more like Isho that's in black. If we just pull that up here, and I spelled that wrong. If it wants to load, there we go. It's similar to Isho, right? So Isho, if your opponent has 6 cards in their hand, then they trash 2 cards. And Trafalgar Law, if they have 7 cards in their hand, they trash 2 cards. Now, why is this good, right? At first, I was like, oh man, 4 costs, 5,000 power. Again, it's the same stat line as Jean Bart, like, But obviously, it has blocker as well, which is really, really nice. So you could use him as a blocker. He's 5k, so you can use him as an attacker. And on top of that, he has counter on him as well. So whereas the Isho and the other law that we talked about do not have counter, this law does have counter for the on-hand effects, and in fact, it works so nice. It feels so good to just rip 2 cards out of your opponent's hand in the mid-game. It feels so damn good, and sending back 1 Dawn is honestly not a problem at all when you have Monkey D. Luffy who can just rip it right back to your active area. Really, really nice. So that's going to be your mid-game blockers. Now, how do we close out games? What are our main attackers? Well, we are running 4 copies of 7 cost Eustace Captain Kidd. This card is absolutely amazing. It's really unfortunate that this is a starter deck uses Captain Kidd because I would love to have this card in an alternate art. But with that being said, we have 4 copies of him, 4 copies of starter deck Monkey D. Luffy, who's absolutely cracked, and I'll talk a little bit more about him shortly, and then 2 copies of Rush Kaido. So this is my end the game big body characters that you want to play. So you're scaling up with the purpose of dropping the Kid, the Luffy, or the Kaido. You want to have as many of these on the board as possible if you can while maintaining your defenses. I know it sounds like a pipe dream, right? If any deck can just do what they want, then of course they're going to win. The thing is, it's actually quite easy to do. And if you play this deck, you'll see what I'm saying. It's actually very easy to scale up to that point and get down multiple useless Captain Kids, or have a Captain Kid on board along with a Kaido, or a Captain Kid on board along with a Luffy, right? So the Kid is, the Kaido's self-explanatory. We all know him from, again, pre-release. Send back 5 Dawn, pop 6 costs or less, and it has Rush. Very powerful. Monkey D. Luffy also has Rush for 10 costs, and he's 11k power. So you're basically almost guaranteed to get a swing into your opponent, which is very, very good. Now, here's the thing that's amazing about him. So once per turn, if your opponent activates a blocker, you can KO one of your opponent's characters with 8,000 powers or less. Now, remember, it says once per turn. It's not while attacking or anything like that. Meaning, you can swing with your Useless Captain Kid first. Useless Captain Kid ability activates. Let's talk about Useless Captain Kid. On play and when attacking, you can send back 1 Dawn. You increase your leader's power by 1,000 until the end of your opponent's turn. So at the start of your next turn, that's when the power goes down. So when you use this, it's 7k on your turn and 7k on your opponent's turn. Very powerful and very important to remember. So say you want to do that first, right? Because you want to pump up your leader, you know, you're trying to get your numbers right, you know, your sequence of operations. You're going to attack with your Useless Captain Kid first, pump up your Luffy, and then your opponent decides to block that attack for whatever reason. Well, now your Luffy can then pop something on board. Because, again, it doesn't have to be while Luffy attacks. It's any time a blocker is activated by your opponent. So you could pop that. Now, more often than not, even if like you're swinging for game and Luffy swings into their leader and then they use a blocker, again, you could use that to pop any of their other cards and then continue to proceed with any of your other big bodies like your Kaidos, like your Captain Kid, like your Luffy. And the only thing that's really taking this off the board that this early, by the time you can get this out, if you really ramp, is going to be Red Rock. Right? Red Rock is going to be like the main thing that will really suss this. Outside of that, I can't really see anything that will be able to keep up with the speed in which you can get this out and really harass your opponent. Very, very strong card. In fact, this card is what, like, it's just ridiculous. And now the Useless Captain Kid, we talked about his ability. He is really good once you get to that 7 Dawn mark to play him, get your Luffy to 7k. Almost every single turn you'll have your Luffy as a 7k leader, and again, that makes it more difficult for your opponent to play on offense. We already thought it was difficult to play into what's it called, Edward Newgate, right, with his 6k. And then obviously getting pumped up by 9-cost Whitebeard. But this essentially allows you to do the same thing. If you have multiple copies of Useless Captain Kid, you could do it every single turn. Every turn you're getting 2 Dawn back for your turn anyways, in addition to getting 1 Dawn from your Monkey D. Luffy, so you're technically 1 Dawn positive. That opens you up to continue to have other defensive plays with Radical Beam for when you're at 2 life or less, or Blast Breath, which is essentially a Radical Beam in this deck, because for 1 cost you send 1 Dawn back, and guess what? Your Luffy can always just get that Dawn back as well, so you end up going neutral when it turns back to your turn. Obviously, you're going to get 2 Dawn back anyways as well as the start of your turn, so using Blast Breath is pretty much free. Of course, now you can also use things like Thunder Bagua as well, which will also increase your ramp, right? Let's open up purple. This is also going to increase your ramp, but again, the deck list is really tight, and I prefer to run copies of Jet Gatling over Thunder Bagua at this point, just because sometimes you do get stuck with cards that you might not want to have in your hand at that time. Jet Gatling allows you to have plus 3,000, right? Putting your Luffy at 9k. You know, it's very underrated. If it's already pumped up with Useless Captain Kid, it puts him at 10k for 0 Dawn, and then you could just trash a Kaido. Maybe you don't need the other Kaido. Maybe you don't need the other Luffy, right? At that point in time. And now you were able to get that for free, whereas Luffy would not be a counter at all in that situation, right? So that's the way I kind of look at it. The fact that it's 0 Dawn, I think it's really nice. So these are our defensive tools: the Jet Gatling, the Radical Beam, and the Blast Breath. And then, of course, you have Lead Performer in order to accelerate that ramp. But more importantly, it lets you draw a card. And then, again, if it gets hit and trigger, you can activate it as well. So it's going, that extra draw card is going to allow you to hopefully dig for that Captain Kid, for that Kaido, for that Luffy, for when you're really trying to close out the game. So this is my red and purple, I was going to say red and purple Kaido list. My red and purple Yonko Luffy list. Guys, this deck is so much fun, and I can't wait to see how it evolves. Obviously, there's so many cards, guys, that you can play in this, right? You know, like, there's potential of Heat, there's potential of Wire, right? There's all these different cards that you can play. You can max out copies of John Bart. Like, the ratios, I'm still playing with. It's still early days. But with that being said, this deck is so much fun. The deck building potential for these leaders are going to be great. And the best thing is you can take this core and then still flip around and play Useless Captain Kid. You can flip around and play Law. In my opinion, I'm not a big fan of Law right now, but I'm still going to be playing around with him. I do have a Useless Captain Kid build as well, but I'm not comfortable sharing it because I don't think mine is that good, because quite frankly, it loses a lot. I'm still trying to learn how to play the leader in the way, like Monkey D. Luffy, it just clicked for me, right? Like, it was just super easy. Whereas this kid leader is a little bit different, but I do think that this kid has potential to be super yoked, and maybe I'll be making a video on him next. So let me know in the comments below if this is a leader that you guys are interested in. And I will make a video on my list as well. I'll share it. To be fair, I don't think my red purple kit list is that good, but if you guys want to see it, I will share it. But with that being said, guys, like the video, subscribe. I will catch you guys later. Make sure you try out red purple Luffy. Peace.